Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and get started now. So again, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for a webinar and discussion about permit streamlining for EV charging stations. My name is Samaya Elder. I'm a regional planner on the climate team here at SANDAG, and I'm joined today by Elsa Wright from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, as well as Alex Dahl from the Center for Sustainable Energy. Next slide, please. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping and logistical items. If you're experiencing any audio issues with your device, we recommend dialing in using the number on your invitation. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them at any time using the chat feature, or you can hold them until the end as we'll have time for a live Q&A. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all registered attendees after the webinar. So here's an overview of the agenda for today. I'm going to start with a brief introduction before our other speakers share a more detailed deep dive into resources, tools, and best practices for permit streamlining. And as I mentioned, we'll finish with plenty of time for a Q&A and discussion. So firstly, getting started with the introduction, let's talk about why we're here today and why permit streamlining is important. There are a number of benefits associated with permit streamlining, but to highlight three key ones. Number one is obviously to comply with state law. I wanted to highlight AB 970 and AB 1236 here, although Elsa from GO-Biz will talk about those more in more detail later on in the webinar. But these are two state laws that specifically concern permit streamlining, and of course, SANDAG, we want to encourage all of our local jurisdictions to comply with those. The second benefit is to save on staff time. So based on Cali VIP data, we found that jurisdictions with permit streamlining in place were able to process permits 28 days quicker than those without, so almost a month quicker. In terms of cost benefit, it makes sense from a capacity and effort perspective to pursue permit streamlining in your jurisdiction. And then third, permit streamlining makes good business sense. It can help entice investment to the region or even specifically to your jurisdiction. SANDAG and others have heard from EV service providers and charging companies directly that they seek out and prefer to do business in places where the process is easier and there aren't significant barriers or time delays in getting projects permitted. Next slide, please. So in addition to AB 970 and AB 1236, those permit streamlining laws, I also want to touch on policies and mandates that can also impact the region's local governments in terms of zero emission vehicles. This slide features Governor Newsom's Executive Order N7920, which many of you are probably familiar with. It essentially mandates that 100% of new vehicle sales for passenger vehicles must be zero emission by 2035. In addition to this executive order, there are also other state rulings from CARB and significant federal investment all targeting EV adoption. This push for the transition to zero emission vehicles will result in an equally significant push or increase in the demand for EV charging infrastructure. So becoming permit streamlined now is going to be key to meeting this increased demand in the future. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we look at what these policies and mandates mean for the San Diego region is through this zero emission vehicle or ZEV forecast. This is from the Accelerate to Zero Emissions Regional EV Gap Analysis, which was published in 2021. It shows that to meet our region's fair share of federal and state EV mandates, we're projecting more than 771,000 EVs on San Diego roads by 2030. And to fuel this growing population, we'll need more than 155,000 charging ports. So with these projections in combination with shifting consumer preferences and market trends, it's easy to see how the demand for EV charging installations is just going to continue to grow. Current CEC data states that we have a little more than 7,700 chargers in the region, and this is only public and shared private chargers, so this does not include private or home charging. But compared to the estimates in the ZEV forecast, we can see that we're going to experience a lot more installations and permit requests in the future. Next slide, please. So moving on again from vehicle and infrastructure adoption, where are we actually at in terms of permit streamlining progress? This map and the data and the color coding is from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. They developed this kind of traffic light system, red, yellow, and green, to indicate which jurisdictions are streamlining in progress, or not yet streamlined. And as of this month, The map shows that almost half of all the jurisdictions in the region are permit streamlined, which is really exciting to see. Definitely want to give kudos to all who are working on getting to green. And SANDAG continually tracks this progress, and this is a significant increase from even just a few months ago. So we're definitely on the positive trend. Alex from Center for Sustainable Energy will cover this again later in the presentation, but before I end, I wanted to mention that as a follow-up to this webinar, we're offering one-on-one technical assistance for jurisdictions who want to become green or permit streamlined. We especially encourage staff from jurisdictions who are either in red or yellow status to keep an eye out for that offering. And with that, that concludes my part of this webinar, and I'm going to pass it to Elsa from Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. My contact information is on the previous slide if you're interested in reaching out to SANDAG. I'm always happy to hear from you and help in any way that I can. And with that, take it away, Elsa.
Thank you, Samaya. And thank you to SANDAG for the opportunity to talk about permit streamlining this morning. My name is Elsa Wright, and I am the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Streamline Permitting and Development Specialist for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. I work with cities and counties to implement zero emission vehicle streamlining legislation, Assembly Bill 1236, AB 970, and most recently SB 1291, which is hydrogen permit streamlining. Next slide, please. So what are the requirements to be considered streamlined for an AHJ? So to be considered streamlined, an AHJ must have a checklist outlining all documents that are required to be submitted for review and approval of each project. Additionally, an AHJ must have an adopted ordinance that meets specific criteria. This criteria includes committing to an administrative review of EV applications. That review and approval is limited to health and safety only, meaning that it shouldn't be going through the aesthetic, landscaping, zoning. It should just be reviewed for health and safety issues only. So the AHJ must also accept electronic signatures in lieu of wet signatures that must be in the ordinance. And the AHJ should also outline in the ordinance that the EV CS is not subject to association approval, meaning a homeowners association doesn't have to approve for it to be installed in that area. And the AHJ also must include in their ordinance that a written correction notice or one deficiency notice shall detail all the deficiencies if an application is incomplete once it is submitted. Next slide, please. So AB 970 pretty much builds on AB 1236 by implementing timeframes into that streamlining process and also clarifying parking reductions. So the shorter timeframes are 5 days after an applicant submits to deem the application incomplete or complete, and then 20 days for approval to build. And in that 20 days, they'll just be reviewing for health and safety issues only. And this is for 25 or fewer chargers. Longer timeframes for projects larger than 25 is 10 days to deem incomplete or complete, and then 40 days to review for health and safety for approval to build. It also clarified parking, that if EV charging stations and support equipment take place of parking spaces, the city or county is required to reduce the number of required parking spaces. This went into effect for all cities and counties effective January 1st of 2023. Next slide, please. So let's take a deeper look at AB 1236. The first step is to adopt an ordinance that creates a streamlined process, and you can see that at the top. The streamlining requires an online application and an online checklist. Once the applicant provides the requested documentation on the checklist, the building department reviews the application to determine if all requested documentation is present. The AHJ has 5 to 10 days, depending on how large the project is, to deem the application complete. Once the application is deemed complete, the building official conducts a review that's to be limited to health and safety, as mentioned before. If the application is deemed incomplete, the building official shall note all the deficiencies and the applicant shall correct and return for the building's official health and safety review. In a nutshell, if a charger is safe and there aren't any hazards, and there is an agreement between the installer and site owner, then the applicant should get the go-ahead. AB 1236 is intended to prevent the application from moving department to department and getting stuck on a desk. The ordinance empowers the building official to be the reviewer, freeing up planning, fire, and other departments to focus on other applications. Next slide, please. So GO-Biz has a lot of resources that are available. You can find them by Googling GO-Biz readiness and then clicking on the plug-in electric vehicle charge station readiness page. And once you do, it will navigate to this next page. Next slide, please. So on the GO-Biz ZEV readiness page, you'll find the permitting guidebook that contains a lot of information and best practices regarding permitting for both AHJs as well as developers. The permitting scorecard here over to the left is what I use to determine if an AHJ meets the criteria to be considered streamlined and updated on the map that you see below. Up above, you'll see permitting fact sheets. GO-Biz has created permitting fact sheets to assist developers and AHJs on issues that frequently arise in relation to streamlined permitting. You'll also see we have best practices and resources. AHJs can find model ordinances and checklists here when they're in the process of streamlining to create their own checklists and ordinances. Towards the bottom of the screen, you'll notice a map that has the colors green, yellow, and red. These colors represent the streamlining status of each county or city, and I'll explain that a little bit more on the next slide. So if a city is considered green, that city has an ordinance that meets the requirements that are outlined in AB 1236, and it also has a checklist. Excuse me. If it's considered yellow, it means that that city is in progress. So they may have an ordinance. That ordinance may be missing in a requirement, or they have a checklist but no ordinance. So they're in the process of coming into compliance, but they're not quite fully streamlined yet. And if a city is noted as red on the page, it's because they do not have an ordinance and they do not have a checklist available online and they're not considered streamlined. So next slide. So here you'll see when you double click on a jurisdiction, a card will come up. And what you see here are the 8 criteria that we look at to determine if that city or county is considered streamlined. If you also look, you'll see that there are a link to the ordinance and the checklist. A lot of developers use this site to pull up the city's ordinance and checklist to start the streamlining process. So yeah, that's it for that page. So next slide. So some best practices for AHJs. The first and foremost is that an AHJ has an expedited permitting process for EV applications. That permitting process is administratively approved, meaning that no discretionary permit is required. The AHJ is only focused on health and safety considerations. So they're conducting a very limited review, not considering aesthetics, zoning, just considering the health and safety issues. The AHJ should also accept electronic signatures for every document and phase of the process, and that the AHJ provides one deficiency notice after the applicant submits packets from the checklist. The permitting process is clearly explained on the AHJ website in an easily locatable area to the public. This is really effective in reducing a lot of confusion for the developers and those wishing to install EV stations in their home. AHJ that offer access to an expert who can support station developers through the entire permitting process is a best practice as well. And to the next slide, please. So here's my contact information. Elsa Wright, ZEV Infrastructure Permitting Development Specialist, GO-Biz, and my email beneath. Feel free to reach out with any permitting questions, and I'd be glad to help. Thank you, Samaya.
Awesome. Thank you, Elsa, and thank you, Samaya. My name is Alex Dahl. I will be finishing off our presentation here, and I am representing the Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE. We are a nonprofit headquartered in San Diego, and all of the work that we do focuses on one central mission, and that is decarbonization. I specifically work with the CAL-eVIP project. CAL-eVIP stands for the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project. And CAL-eVIP provides funding for installing publicly available EV charging stations across California. CAL-eVIP is funded through the California Energy Commission, or CEC's Clean Transportation Program. I'm hoping that some of you on this webinar today have heard of CAL-eVIP. CAL-eVIP 1.0 was a $186 million block grant via the CEC. We also recruited an additional $37 million for additional funding in communities in conjunction with regional partners in those communities. What CAL-eVIP 1.0 is from 2017 through 2022, we launched 13 regional projects across 36 different California counties to fund both level 2 and direct current fast chargers. CAL-eVIP 1.0 covered 75% of installation costs and were served on a first come, first served basis. So what does that mean on the impact on the state of California? So far, CAL-eVIP applicants have completed 300 EVI projects, which equates to about 1,300 EV chargers across the state and nearly $32 million in rebate checks in applicant hands. We also work closely with community partners across the state and have allocated more than $80 million in these incentives, specifically to disadvantaged and low-income communities across California. I want to take a closer look at CAL-eVIP 1.0 rebates specifically in San Diego County. When we launched the San Diego County Incentive Project, it was just under $22 million in funds. It was presented in partnership with co-funders SANDAG, who's obviously presenting here today, as well as the Air Pollution Control District. And we committed that at least a minimum of 25% of this funding would be distributed in disadvantaged and low-income sites across San Diego County. Sorry, can you go back one slide? Awesome, thank you so much. I just want to call everyone's attention to the diagram here on the left side of the screen. This represents in real time the funding in the San Diego County Incentive Project. This is actually a live funds tracker that you can track for all 13 of our regional projects on the CAL-eVIP website. In San Diego County, we're very excited about the installations because funding is already fully reserved in San Diego County. If you look at this graphic here, the gray bars above DC fast charger and above L2 represent reserved funds. So these are projects that have funds set aside for them and are in the planning, construction, or energization phase that we expect to see coming forward in your community in the next year or two. The green bars represent funds that have already been issued, which means those chargers are energized and are already working in your county. And now next slide, please. So let's take a closer look at those green bars of issued CAL-eVIP rebate payments. As of this month, we have 17 CAL-eVIP funded installation projects completed in San Diego County. I pulled those 17 projects out and presented them on the slide here. You'll see that the application numbers, which doesn't mean much, that's just how we keep track of them, but I've added the AHJ where they took place and the technology type, and then I've color coded them based on the streamlined progress of the AHJ they took place in. What's so interesting here is of the completed CAL-eVIP funded projects so far in San Diego County, 76% of them have been completed in streamlined AHJs. You'll see overwhelmingly the city of San Diego here. The reason I want to call this to your attention is to take advantage of rebate funds that are coming to your AHJ by preparing your permitting process to expedite the EVI installations. We saw that those gray bars were really high. We expect tons more installation projects to be completed in the next year and then the years following. So it'll be interesting to come back in a few years and look at a map overlaid of the streamlined counties as well as the timeline of completing these EP projects. And then I just wanted to highlight the overwhelming example from the previous slide, which was the city of San Diego. San Diego is considered streamlined, which means that they have all of these qualities complete. Elsa already went through them, so I won't go any further through them, but I will take note of this picture here on the right side of the screen. This is the City of San Diego's posted checklist. It's very thorough, it's easy to follow, and permit applicants can come to this and prepare their application package right away. This may be something that you want to model for your own AHJ. And it's one thing to look at a table of application numbers and think about your community. It's another to actually think about the charters on the ground that now exist in your community. So I wanted to spotlight just one of these completed Cali VIP funded projects. This one here is at the Wally Park Airport parking garage on the corner of Kettner and Sassafras downtown, and there were 10 L2 charters completed there. Taking a deeper dive into what that looks like, the applicant here applied for their permit late January last year. They then received an issued permit early March. So that's incredibly quick turnaround time to receive an issued permit. They then completed the installation. It was signed off before the end of the year, and the charging station was operational less than a year later. There are tons and tons of factors that go into completing an EVI installation project. Permitting is just one of those pieces. But again, just highlighting that a streamlined permit process will certainly expedite getting chargers in the ground faster in your community. Now, Cali VIP 1.0 in San Diego County is already fully reserved, but I have very exciting news. We just announced, literally just last week, that Cali VIP 2.0's Golden State Priority Project will have a second funding window. It's going to open mid-September and close mid-November of this year. We are funding the northern and southern regions of California. You can see on the map highlighted in yellow here that that does include San Diego County, so that's very exciting for everyone on this webinar here today. What the second launch of the Golden State Priority Project will look like is $38 million for only DC fast charger rebates. These will be for publicly available sites only in disadvantaged and low-income communities. Now in Cali VIP 1.0, we reserve funds based on a first-come, first-served basis. In Cali VIP 2.0, we're encouraging applicants to get started on their projects, and then we are rewarding the applicants who move furthest in the process before completing their application. So to be considered for funding, Cali VIP 2.0 applicants must show at a minimum that they have submitted documentation to their utility service provider for final utility design. So that's progressing beyond just initial application steps, and have applied for a permit with their AHJ. Again, I want to call attention to this because we are requiring that Cali VIP 2.0 applicants are already working on final utility designs with their utility service provider and have already applied for a permit with their AHJ. Applicants who progress furthest in both utility service and in the permitting process will be rewarded with a higher place in the funding queue and are therefore more likely to receive funds for their installation. So please prepare your AHJ for both an increase in EVI projects and in new permit applications that will be coming later this fall. And Cali VIP 2.0 only funds DC fast charger rebates moving forward. So I just want to call to your attention that if you're looking for level 2 rebates, those are available via Community in Charge, which is implemented by CalSTART. And finally, as Samaya mentioned, I highly encourage everyone on this call to take advantage of permit streamlining support. Now, what does that look like? I will be hosting one-on-one meetings for San Diego County AHJs for personalized support on your AHJ becoming streamlined. So these support calls can include compliance scorecard review, sample ordinance and materials checklist review, or just general tips on how to streamline your jurisdiction. If you are looking to take advantage of these one-on-one streamlining support meetings or are just curious about EVI rebate information in general, please contact me. My email address and phone number are on the slide here. If you are a representative from an AHJ who is on this call today, don't worry, I will be reaching out to you after this webinar to set up those one-on-one streamlining support meetings in the next coming weeks. All right, that was all of the content from our 3 speakers. All speakers are still here, so that's Samaya from SANDAG, Elsa from GO-Biz, and myself, Alex, from the Center for Sustainable Energy. We would love to have a live discussion. So if you have any questions or comments that you feel like adding with your voice, please use the raise hand feature on GoToWebinar. I will then unmute you and you will unmute yourself and be able to ask that question out loud. Please note that that may take a moment to do the double unmute, but if your hand is up, I am looking for you and I will see you. If you have any questions or comments and you don't feel like asking with your voice today, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. I will read them out loud for any of our speakers. All right, we will start off with this question for Elsa from GO-Biz. This question is, if I want to report my progress on permit streamlining, who at GO-Biz do I contact? For example, if I've started the process and should be moved from red to yellow, how do I demonstrate that?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I would be the contact for that, or alternatively, you could reach out to the ZEV inbox. But so an email or just a phone call to let me know that something has been posted or like an ordinance has been passed is all that it really takes. And then I will review it and make sure that it matches the criteria that's required in order to be streamlined. And then I update the map. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Elsa.
Yeah.
Christopher, I see that you have a question. You've dropped it in the chat. Perfect. I'll go ahead and read your question from the chat then. Christian's question is, Southeast San Diego has virtually no EV chargers and has out-of-date infrastructure. Is there a general infrastructure requirement needed to support EV chargers? Samaya, I'll pass this to you. If not, I'll take it.
Sorry, I was just unmuting. I don't know of a general infrastructure requirement. There are a lot of funding opportunities, and we recognize the need to continue to invest in key areas in San Diego. So we're investing in incentives. We're looking at ways to expand that. SANDAG has our commitment for EV charging incentives through, I believe, 2050. So we're developing or starting to think about kind of the next phase of what that will look like and how to target specific areas that are still lacking infrastructure.
Awesome. Thank you, Samaya. Again, any other questions, continue to drop them in the chat. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask your question out loud as well. All right, I have another question here for Elsa. Elsa, what is the distinction between red and yellow?
Thank you. That's a great question. So red would mean that there has been no progress made at all towards streamlining. So there's no ordinance and there is no checklist. Yellow is a little different. Maybe the AHJ has one item or the other. So they might have an ordinance posted but no checklist, or they may have the checklist and no ordinance, or there's been instances in where the ordinance might be missing a few of the key requirements to be considered streamlined. So that would be the difference between the yellow and the red.
Awesome, thank you, Elsa. And then a follow-up question to that are, what are the near-term steps that I can take to move from red to yellow?
So I think one of the easiest steps that would be to take to move yourself from red to yellow would be to post the checklist. Typically, an ordinance takes quite some time to be adopted. So to move, posting the checklist would be one of the quickest ways to start the progression of streamlining.
Great, thank you, Elsa. If we don't have any other questions, I just want to remind you all one more time to take advantage of the technical assistance offered, those one-on-one streamlining support meetings. But we do have one more question came in. This question is, will contact information be sent out? Absolutely. Following the webinar, we'll follow up with the slides and each of our specific contact information from Samaya at SANDAG, Elsa at GO-Biz, and myself from CSE. And then one final reminder, if you represent an AHJ in San Diego County who has attended this webinar, I will be reaching out to you to set up those one-on-one streamline support technical assistance calls. So for any AHJ in San Diego County, I will be reaching out to provide that assistance. Great, it looks like that may be all of our questions. Thank you all so much for attending with us this morning. Please check out your, look out in your inboxes for a follow-up email with these slides and all of our contact information. Thank you so much.